agree with you there, and I think it leads into a couple of my concerns here. But I am very, very on the train. I'm on board with this idea that this is going to be super, super successful for a select few teams. Like teams like, and I picked like Louisville, Sacramento, teams that were kind of on MLS's doorstep already, have this really good following, have had this really good following for quite a while. No problems, right? No problems whatsoever. My concern is something like, and I won't even pick teams that exist already. I will go here and say, okay, we've got a new Division 1 league coming in, and to do it, they are going to need seven, just pick 7 teams, right? 7 teams that they're going to have to place in there because they're going to need to hit these pro league standard things we're going to talk about in a second. Those don't have the dynamic fan bases that you would expect out of teams like Louisville and Sacramento and things like that, or Louisville for my friends in Kentucky. Yes, I know I was there. I know how to pronounce it. I'm sorry. If those teams go down and say they go down back to back, now you're in trouble because now you just paid. I think we put the hypothetical at 50 million, right? Now you just paid 50 million plus whatever you spent on all these players that you're going to get, and now you're cutting your fan base in half. Now you cut it in half again. You're down to 25% of what you had 2 years ago. And again, this is a very, very worst case scenario, right? Well, and I understand that. But I don't believe like if you just turn a blind eye to the worst case scenario, it never shows up, right? And the other problem that I have with that is you see teams, and as a fan of Stoke City now, I feel like I knew that already, but I got a friend of mine as well who's also a Stoke City fan. We might have talked about this, where they've been in the second division in a relegation battle for a couple of years now. They haven't been back to the Prem in a while.
Yeah.
There are teams that have never even stepped foot in the English soccer league, right? Is that the EFL, right? Is what's called
Yep.
the
hmm
football leagues.
The English Football League. Yep.
How long will and I don't want to say that USL is a semi-pro or non-professional because I understand that they are, but
Yeah.
how long will they be able to manage as a non-first division team, which is seen in America unfairly as not professional?
Right.
Before their fans say, "Oh, I'm only going to show up when you get to the top division." And that's kind of where one of my concerns is like, how is this going to work with fan engagement, right? How are you going to prove to these people like, "Oh, it's worth it. I know we haven't been in a promotion fight in 3 years, but don't worry, keep coming back," right?
Yeah, I mean it's the same as any other team, right? When your team stagnates and you just feel like a lot of people can get, disenfranchised and want to leave. I think the excitement of Pro Rel, a lot of it is to do when your team is hot and you're going up, or
Mhm.
your team is down and you're going down. Like, I'll give you some examples from the English Football League.
Mhm.
A team, for example, like Blackburn or Wigan, that was once a Premier League team when I was a kid growing up, and fell all the way down into like League Two and never really managed to recover. Or like Portsmouth, for example, a once great Premier League team,
Right.
no longer came back. And those communities now. Portsmouth still get like, 15, 20,000. This is
Mhm.
this is in England where everything is completely different, from the sense of you have years and years of fan bases that go back generations. We don't have that here in the US, so that is the concern, is when your team gets relegated, how does your fan base react that has only, been following the team for 5, 10 years? I think a lot of it comes down to, is US soccer fans at that level of passion and drive that your European or your South American fans are. And as someone who has been here, in the soccer landscape since like 2012, I could tell you that there are a lot of soccer passionate fans out there. And
Oh
I
yeah.
believe that this country is full of markets that have by far enough people in order to be able to sustain, to get you, your 10, 15,000 fans out for a week. I mean, England has got 90 clubs across a space that is far smaller, with a far smaller population. Now, of course, there's the difference in, American sports. You've got all of these other options, But here in the US, I do feel like it's growing to the level of passion where people will go watch their local club, they will support their local club, and they will support their local club despite them getting relegated. I genuinely think that is a thing, but USL has to develop that. They have to
Hmm.
bring in the players, they have to grow, they have to continue to create those storylines and connections with fans. But I do think your level of fan who's going to go and support a USL club, I believe is enough of a fanatic that if they get relegated, they're not just going to walk away from what they're invested in,
Sure,
which is
sure.
was different from 10, 15 years ago. I believe
Right.
there's enough of those fanatics in the country now that are going to be that loyal. And really, at the end of the day, that's what USL is looking for.
And I think that's where my hang up with this is because I want to believe that, but I don't. And it might be because I've lived in New York for so long and I have walked around Red Bull Arena and seen every single jersey except a Red Bull jersey. And they're there just to hang out. So if Red Bull started doing poorly, which we saw, we dropped attendance by 3, 4, 5, 6,000 fans a year. Like it was significant. Yeah, so I've been trying to get a friend of mine into MLS, into soccer in general. And I sent him a message. I'm trying to get him to Chicago Fire, right? Because he knows Greg. He knows who Greg Berhalter is. Essentially, he has. We were doing like, oh, what MLS teams translate to NFL, right? I'm like, oh, Miami Dolphins haven't made the, haven't won a playoff game in 2000. Chicago haven't done anything since 2000. Like you guys are spot on. Like you'd love it. So I sent him to it. I'm like, this is the third week in a row you can watch Chicago Fire for free. Just turn on Apple TV Go. And you know what his response was? If you think I'm turning on a soccer game over March Madness, you are out of your mind. And that's a significant issue, right? And it gets even worse when it gets into the NFL. And there's the schedule thing. We can talk about that another time too, like what schedule they're going to go for. That's totally cool. But there is a significant, no matter where you go, with exception, there is a significant number of people who are going to look at you and say, I don't care if you can get to the top of any league. You're not getting in the way of my college football. You're not getting in the way of my college basketball. You're not getting in the way of my MLB and NHL, NFL. So can you get into the enough markets where your team that has this pathway to the top of something that in the grand scheme of American sports doesn't matter to the majority of individuals? Can you get into the right markets where they say, yes, that does matter to me? Because it's my, and again, maybe this is just my New York coming out of me, but it's my opinion that as I've walked around and said, hey, I see you're wearing a Liverpool kit. Like, have you seen the Red Bull game? And they laugh at me. They go, why would I watch that? The quality's garbage. I don't see USL with Pro Rel fixing that argument. That's one of my other big concerns is the fact that you need to pick the right location for that to make sense.
100%. And I think that's something that USL has been always dealing with, right? They
Yeah,
haven't just randomly chosen soccer markets to go after. For example, like Orlando City was started actually as the Austin Aztecs in
that's right.
Austin,
That's
and
right.
it was too early for soccer in Austin, and we did not get the fans that we hoped. They moved the franchise to Orlando, to a city that was starved of professional sports outside of Orlando Magic. And as a USL club 10 years ago, we were getting 20, 10, 20,000 for some games.
Right.
So I think it's all about the market you go after. I think it's all about having those markets that are starved of MLS for one. Also being big enough, right? I think, New York has always got more options because it's so massive. There are these markets that you can go in and steal some of the market share, even if MLS is there. But I think more importantly, there's a lot of markets that are untapped and have that ability to really attach themselves to a local team. And I think that's when, Andrew, it becomes a little bit different from, of course, your big sports in America. When I'm saying, you're going to watch them at home or at the bar, and they say, okay, NFL is on, or you can watch MLS or USL. Most Americans are probably going to pick their favorite sport that they're already into. But I think what's different is where you don't have that local actually going to the game, where I can't just walk down the street and go to an NBA or an NFL game.
Hmm.
And I actually, like you said, you bring someone into that environment and they say, hey, this is really cool. This is local. This is in my backyard. I feel like I'm part of something that's a little bit niche. And I think that's a big selling point for here with USL. They've always used is like come be a part of something that's really cool.
Different,
Come be a part
sure.
of something that only some people are in, and a lot of soccer fans really enjoy that. So for me, the Pro Rel thing doesn't really change any of those tactics that USL are going after. I think what changes is like if that does happen and you're a small club, then you could grow and become bigger, and then it could be like, wow, look how many, fans we now have. The difference for us when it was Orlando was we obviously got to the top of USL and couldn't go anywhere like many other clubs, and then you do the promotion by franchise purchase essentially, which is what it was, and to MLS, and that was great. And then the club expanded and it became a huge thing. You're playing Champions League and all this, but it all started from grassroots of USL. So if you don't have these grassroots market teams that can then grow and get bigger, to potentially be a really big entertainment in your own market, then I think it's difficult for those teams ever to get there. There's only going to be so many San Diegos that can come in with $500 million
Right.
expansion fees, where there can be a mass of Oakland Roots, for example.
Yeah, what 100%. I think MLS expansion fees have gotten exorbitantly out of control. Like there is no reason anybody needs to pay 500. This is not now granted the Boston Celtics I think just sold for 6.2 billion. So if we're being, if we're comparing apples to apples here, right? Like, is it
Oh,
really that much?
yeah.
Right. But here's the last thing. And by the way, I want to put this out here. Like, I'm not putting out all of these concerns because I'm like, man, I want them to fail. Right. This is not me. And I know I support MLS, but I support soccer all over the place. So I don't want to see anybody fail or crash and burn. But I am putting out legitimate concerns because I think that they're valid, right?
Yeah.
So I'm looking here at, and again, very early into USL season, but I'm looking at the transfer market attendance, right? Lexington SC, who is building the new stadium, their home opener in the USL Championship, their first game in the second division, did not sell out. They had 5,000, which was a record crowd for them, but their increase from USL one to Championship was, I think, and don't get me wrong, I think maybe you got it up 1,000, 2,000, maybe give or take. And I'll double check that just to be sure. But is this idea of Pro Rel going to, and this transitions to another concern of mine, is the idea of Pro Rel and like the story behind it going to generate enough new fans and returning income as an investor to make it worth spending 6 million on a player, right? Or 6 million on a roster, for example, let's say, because one of the other issue or not issues, one of the other concerns I have is this idea of money, right? Is that Pro Rel going to not only in terms of fans, but TV deals, right? You need to have a good TV deal to spend money to clubs to be able to do this sort of stuff. I mean, they're on about 5 different streaming services right now. I can never find which one half the games are on. But is that deal going to give them enough money to do what they want to do, right? Is it going to be enough to say, hey, if you go in and say, okay, our TV deal says that if you get promoted from USL Championship to USL D1, you're going to get an extra $300,000, and if you win the whole thing, you're going to get $500,000. $800,000 is about the salary hit of one designated player in MLS. Is it really going to be worth it for these investors to shell out so much money without a good TV deal, without this draw? And that's one of the concerns I have is I don't know if it will be because I don't know. See how I phrase this properly. I don't know if TV deals are going to jump on this because it's not the Premier League. It's not the Bundesliga, right? Look at all the fans there, right? You're going to look at a Lexington game with 5,000 people and be like, okay, cool, but you're playing on what looks like, it could be a high school field. It's not. It's very nice, by the way, but it looks like with the way the stand and the stadium are, it's just a basic high school field. Why would we put that on TV? I don't know if you're going to find a ton of people who are going to give them, let's say, Apple TV money from MLS. And that is something that I think also comes into effect because if you're going to try and compete with MLS, you need to compete on quality, not on the basis of, oh, I'm not MLS, right? And right now, that's difficult to do based on spending. MLS is spending lots and lots of money on players. USL is not for a good reason. But are you going to have enough money to say, and this has been the argument for MLS forever, right? MLS, you get $300,000 for winning MLS Cup. Okay, if I'm an owner, why am I spending $18 million on a player to win 300,000? Right? It's the same deal here. If your payout is going to be small, what's the point other than saying, "Oh, I got promoted to a league, I can get 2,000 more fans in." That's one of the biggest concerns I would have with this.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of talk about the USL final, championship having more viewership than the
Yeah, I saw
MLS
that.
Cup final, but I think some new facts came out. The MLS Cup final might have had more. I don't know, but there's clearly this bragging between like, which league is being watched the more. You guys had that whole conversation about, the other day about streaming
Right.
versus regular television. So that's a whole argument here that depends on where you land on that one. I think I agree with what you're saying. You can't compete on quality with MLS right now. And I think they have to take Pro Rel, but also increase the quality of all of the teams and bring better players in because Pro Rel with low quality play is not going to sell as well, that anywhere near as well as MLS with the level they have now. So that is a big issue. And to get those better players in, you need that media money most likely because they're not going to get it from ticket revenue or sponsorship as it is right now. I agree with all of that. And I think what's really interesting here is I think there's a potential for a big streaming service to come in like Apple did, but with an incentive to create a documentary that they film all three tiers and they create every single year, just like we've seen with Drive to Survive and Netflix, or for example, NWSL just did one with Amazon. And I think they could tie something like that into a streaming package and get a really big deal out of it and sell the American people on watch the storylines of the players and then also watch the league on the same channel. Something like that I could see happening. And I can see these, a big streaming giant going in and saying, okay, we're going to be able to get a whole league and the storylines and all of that for, a decent amount of money, not insane amount of money, but enough that USL would go, okay, this is way better than whatever we're going to get from, the regular TV deals that we have at the moment. Regardless, yeah, they have to figure out a way to get more money out of the TV deal, because that is a big way to be able to spend more money on players that they're just not going to be able to find revenue any other way outside of that. That this is
Yeah.
significant enough, in my opinion. Like sponsorships, maybe if you're really good in your market, maybe ticket sales, not, maybe when they increase their stadium size, but even then, it's a
Mhm.
long way off what MLS is going to get,
Right.
and what their competitors. So yeah, for me, I think it'd be really interesting to see something like that where they get the league and the rights to do a TV show documentary tied into that, and I think the both would feed each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what MLS is doing with their onside, series, trying to get the fan engaged in the person less than the team itself. And I agree. It's a great way to get involved and do that. I mean, you saw Wrexham. Nobody knew what Wrexham was, and most people will never ever see Wrexham play ever unless it's a friendly here. But they're tied in because they like
Yeah,
the players, they like the story behind it, they like the TV.
I mean that's
I do.
ESPN and Hulu, so maybe that's the one.
We had that conversation last week, but I'll tell you, Apple TV. If ESPN gave Apple TV money, MLS, nobody's complaining. And I believe that's the way USL is going to go. Is they're going to say, okay, ESPN, we've got this whole thing. It's going to be you're going to sell this. This is what it's worth. Pay it so that we can do this right. And I would hope that they find success in that. I do want to just correct my stat before. Lexington last year had 1,600 fans a game. This first game, their brand new opener, they had 5,000. So they about doubled it, maybe tripled it. So I'll correct myself there, but it was their home opener, so and they didn't sell it out. So there is one other thing I wanted to chat about before we move on to the kind of closing here, and it's one thing we haven't touched on, which is that we said we were going to touch on, which was the Pro League standards, right? And we've kind of been glossing over them a little bit, but just to be very, very astute about this sort of stuff because it is. This is the biggest barrier, in my opinion, for them to go over, right? So this is for their Division One stature because they have yet to have that approved, and this would be any team being promoted into this division would need to meet these standards as well, which is the biggest hurdle for me personally. Is you can get 12 teams for this first division and then 14 by year three that all hit this thing. But the second you put somebody up there, and you can apply for waivers and stuff, I understand that, but if they don't hit it, now you're in trouble, right? So 75% of the teams need to be in markets of a million people or more. That's that's going to be tough
Yeah.
if your second division team plays in a market with 500,000 people and gets promoted. Now you're out of, which, by the way, that is the most at this point in history is the most useless part of this. I believe we're at a point where we don't need that anymore.
I think, yeah, metropolitan markets too is like that can change city to city, and like
Right,
there's
exactly.
so many. It's just a little bit too vague, but also too restricting at the same time.
Correct. Yeah, that can go, and I don't think anybody bats an eye, right? League stadiums need to be enclosed and have a minimum seating capacity of 15,000. That's also a very big hurdle, especially if, certain teams right now are still playing in baseball stadiums, as are MLS teams, by the way. But those baseball stadiums, I believe some of them are minor league that don't hit 15,000. Again, somebody can fact check me on that, and I'd be happy to be wrong. But there are stadium that, do not hit those
Oh,
levels. So right
most
now,
most most
most
of
of them
them.
don't. Yeah, I'm looking at it.
Yeah.
I'm looking at it right now.
I think there's like four championship clubs that have that at the moment. I want to
Yeah,
say off the top of my head.
right now I'm looking at two, but that's because two. It looks like not everyone has hosted a game.
Hmm.
So right now, just two of the 14 that I'm seeing have hit those, and there are some that are close and can expand. But
Yeah,
that, again, if we're looking at saying four are in that market,
it's a
and you
small
want to set
amount for sure.
right, and you need 15 to get up there, you need to within the next 3 years find what is that, eight more teams to say, yeah, we'll build 15,000 seat stadiums in 3 years so that we could play,
Yeah.
or rent out
They,
football stadiums, which MLS got dumped on for years for playing on fields with football lines. Right now, you're going to have to go back to that, right?
yeah, I mean they do have some clubs ready to come in.
Yes.
My assumption on this would be that a lot of the teams in USL League One would potentially move up to the championship, and a lot of the
Mhm.
championship teams would go for the requirements for D1 to the USL Premiership, let's say, which they have actually um, put in the rights to own the name USL Premiership. So it might be that is what it's called. So there's going to be clubs moving from the championship up to the Premiership for them. So then you're going to have new teams probably added into League One. Maybe they'll add teams into all three tiers. I think a lot of it will be the dependency on the new owners and what they feel comfortable with. Like some of these new owners will come in and say, great, yeah, like I want to be a level three team. I want to be a League One team. So that works for me if there's more spaces in that. Whereas other teams that are in the championship level are probably vying to be one of those first, teams moved up into the quote unquote premiership for them as well. So it's going to be some reshuffling.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's the other issue too, is everybody glams over the idea of like, oh, you can start at the bottom and work your way up. If you start at the bottom and you're playing at a high school field, uh, and again, that's an exaggeration, people. I understand that I'm exaggerating this, right? But and then you get promoted in your first year and you don't have the money to get there, what's going to happen, right? Are they just going to say, "Oh, stay down, sorry," and then the next person goes up? Is nobody going to go up and down? Like, where does this kind of fall? Are you basically
Yeah.
saying, okay, we're going to have Pro Rel, but only for the people who hit all of these categories, which is basically like locking it into one league anyway, right?
Well, I think that's exactly what the issue is because D1, D2, D3, all of these, standards were written for teams that aren't going to move. It
Right.
was never designed. None of this was ever written with the idea of a team moving. So if you say in D1 you've got to have 15,000, you assume all the teams are going to be there. It doesn't account for new teams coming into that league that were just in a league below before, not having any time to prepare to enter this new league to meet the requirements. It was never designed to have these teams moving in and out. So I really think that US soccer has to and should take these standards and make them, you know, more usable, make them really just takes out some of these issues that are going to be created from, what USL is trying to do is very ambitious and should be commended. And I feel US soccer could quite easily stop them just by saying, hey, it's not going to work based on our standards. But in reality, US soccer have created these standards for what? Like just because they decided one day this is what the standards are, so they can just decide once again to change them to benefit this. And I think the other one is the, four teams based across East and Central Pacific time zones.
Right.
How does that work with
Hmm.
Pro Rel? Like what happens if all your Eastern teams get relegated?
Also, where's Mountain Time Zone? Why are we disrespecting the Mountain Time
Yeah,
Zone?
I
Like,
I I laughed at that. I was like,
yeah.
yeah, you three
Well,
time zones. Okay, all right.
here's what
Um,
I'll say is that this reads like a 5 year production plan. This reads like somebody who sat down and said, okay, we have failed 18 different soccer leagues in the last 100 years. We need a plan right now to say we need to get to this point by 5 years from now so that we can survive, right? And I believe that's what this is about. Like the biggest part of this is financial viability. You need to be an owner who can absorb losses, right? And that's one of the other things everybody comes in is like, oh, you can be a fan owned club and everybody can. Not really, right? Because if you go out and buy somebody, we lose money, and everybody's like, "Oh, I'm pulling my money now." Your club folds, right? So this was
yeah,
written in 90 whatever or whenever they came out.
yeah,
When were they last?
yeah.
I think they were last updated 2023.
2023.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
But
when
the financial viability, I'm all for. I think that
right,
is
absolutely.
is very important, and they should have that. I think there's just the other parts that don't
Agreed.
work.
100% agreed. We can adjust those, but I do think that there is still room for this to exist because you need to make sure that things don't go south. Now,
Yeah.
every single part of this I can look at and say, okay, this makes sense of why it's here, but I think that the levels are still too high, right? Metropolitan markets in areas of 100 or a million people, it makes sense, right? You need to be in areas where people will come and just mosey in and watch you play, right? Does it need to be a million people anymore? I don't think so, right? I think we can go lower than that. Stadiums of 15,000 people. I believe that it's important to have stadiums that people look at and respect, right? Because we're trying to gain respect not only locally but globally, right? Does it need to be 15,000? I don't know if it does, right? Those are conversations you can have, but I don't think that one place that you can falter on is financial viability and owners with money, because if you don't
No.
have that part of it, you're not sustainable. I think yeah. So the league or the owners must or the ownership group must demonstrate financial capacity to operate for 5 years. That's important. If you can't show that you can't run a team, and I'm sure the league has operating costs that they predict it's going to be. If you show up and you're like, I have $3, right? You're the SpongeBob meme, right? Here's $3. What
Yeah.
can I do with it? You can't
Yeah.
run a team. You can't. You just physically can't. It doesn't matter how much crowd surfing or crowdfunding you do or whatever it may
No.
be, which is
And nor should you
awesome.
be allowed to either. Like that
Correct.
I do not, yeah. I all of the standards need to be reduced. I think
Hmm.
maybe I don't the financial viability one, that's something that I couldn't tell you.
Right.
Haven't got a degree in finance, but maybe that one also should be brought down slightly. I think
Hmm.
the big indicator here is, when you look at the D1, sorry, the D2 standards that USL is currently, adhering to. Um, it's 75% of metropolitan areas at 7,500. So 7,500,000. So it's close, but the other one that's really far away is the stadiums all have a minimum capacity of 5,000. So you've gone from 5,000 to 15,000 on your stadium capacity. I think that is really too far
It's
for
a big
one
jump.
level of the game to the other. And so I
Yeah.
think that a lot of the standards there, and a big one that needs to be reduced is that one. And if they could bring it down to 7.5 or 10,000 or something a little bit more reasonable, because I think what is in danger of happening from these USL clubs as they try to meet the standards of these stadium requirements is them moving out of really nice, unique stadiums and environments for fans and
Hmm.
moving into what nobody wants, which is you playing in, local high school stadiums that are big enough, or a football stadium, or a baseball stadium, or anything
Sure.
that isn't soccer specific. So if US soccer could adjust that, and then you're able to expand your club. So, right, like if you look at Indy 11, for example, one of the better championship clubs in USL over the years, they wouldn't meet the requirements of the metropolitan area, I believe, to be a D1 club. So how do you just create more people? You can't do that. So US soccer has to adjust on the metropolitan thing, because there's markets here that are just not going to meet those requirements, but there are teams of those markets that deservedly should be a D1 club, in my opinion.
No, like one of the things I've always said was you can take every requirement. I mean, I'll just use the ones for metropolitan markets, right? Shift it up one, right? Go from 1 million to 750,000. Go from 750,000 to they don't even have one in Division Two, but you can drop that down to 500,000, right?
Hmm.
Open it up so more places fit within your bubble, and now you're doing something right. I think that is the right way to go about it because again, these were written. My guess is they've been edited over time, but my guess is these were written early in MLS to ensure stability, right? We don't know how this league is going to be received. We don't know where we're going to be. We're 30 years in. We've got thriving markets all over the world, not only in MLS, but in USL, USL One, like they're there. Now you can open it up a little bit and say, okay, we can take this gamble and still be okay. And that's
Yeah.
where I think that this needs to go is make sure that your owners are still financially viable. Make sure that they do not lose money to the point where they're like, I'm good and nobody wants to buy it because I've run it into the ground. We'll just shut up shop. See you later. And then open it up so that you can have more first division teams in other areas, right? And that's one of the other positives that come out of this is you have the opportunity to put more first division soccer in more areas. That's never a bad thing, ever.
No. I think that the competition that this will create, hopefully, if it's done right for the US soccer landscape, can only be a positive thing. Um, I also think that MLS, probably doesn't like the idea of more and more markets being taken up. I think a lot
Mm-hmm.
of what USL has always fought against, and I remember when they were fighting against NASL back in the day, there was the USL and NASL, and they were in the same, they were fighting for that tier two, and USL won that battle. So they're not stranger to a US soccer landscape war, as it were. They've done this before. They've always been fighting with MLS on stuff. And I think this one is interesting because I think it's more appealing for these smaller markets to go, I'm gonna be in a Pro Rel system than it is to just say, okay, I'm going to sign up for MLS Next Pro and
Mm-hmm.
know that my club is never going to be an MLS club official. We're just always going to be a tier two market. So I think, perhaps this also forces Don Garber and the rest of them at MLS to have a think about what their next move is going to be because right now, the latest shot was taken by USL with this very impressive and bold move by them.
Oh yeah, this is going to start an expansion war that is going to just blow anything that NASL, USL, MLS, NASL, MLS. I mean, it's going to blow it out of the water. It is going to blow this thing up, and it is either going to be absolutely for the right reasons and good things are going to come of it, or the soccer world's going to implode and we're going to have nothing again.